Welcome back to another fresh episode of the Daddio Show. Right on. I got my wig busted since last time, as my buddy Chris Estes would say. I got my wig busted. Welcome back, guys. Excited to continue with part 2 of this phenomenal interview with Pastor Mark Dunn. What a cool guy, right? I mean, I think you can see from part 1, it's not that stereotype of where you're talking to a minister and you have to be afraid that he's going to over spiritualize everything. Now, when he makes a reference to the gospel or he talks about his faith, does he water it down? No, sir. No, he does not. But in this part 2 of the episode of the interview, you're going to continue to hear Mark really smash in hard on the non-spiritual or secular side of parenting and give us some practical nuts and bolts stuff. And one cool thing about Mark is that he is a businessman. He's an entrepreneur. So he's got some very good knowledge in that area. He's going to talk to you in this episode about how entrepreneurs are people he admires because they have a willingness to take a risk. And he talks about his own, you name it, we'll try it attitude. And this amazing memory of how he got his son started at age 15 doing his own lawn care business with dozens of clients and even hiring college kids to help out with some of that. So what a young hustler. That's really cool. And he also gives a very practical strategy on, I kind of pressed him for more information on this. How do you control your emotions even when you know you're wrong or you know that the other person needs to be handled correctly and you're in a negotiation or a conflict situation? You know in your mind how to do it and how to honor that person's emotions and skip the excuses and provide a solution. You know that needs to be done, but your emotions are just heating up inside. And how do you keep your cool or whatever and not sort of respond out of your own emotion? He gives us a cool strategy he calls the egg toss, visualizing an egg toss, and you'll see what he means by that more in the episode. But yeah, he keeps it real. I love it. I won't go into any more details. You'll have to listen to the episode to find out what else he talks about. But super excited and looking forward to the feedback on this episode. Let's continue with part 2 of this powerful interview with Pastor Mark Dunn, right here only on the Daddio Show weekly podcast series, brought to you by partnerwithgreatness.com. I'm your host, Harding Ison-Bowman. Partner with Greatness is a youth development platform aimed at increasing mentorship around youth ages 14 to 24. We want to help you heal up from damages you may have been dealt, control what you can control, and move forward to live that most powerful and blessed life possible. All right, let's get going. Let's talk about this whole call to adventure thing, man. And we're kind of piecing together some ingredients of parenthood, of fatherhood here. When a kid grows up without a dad, is adventure one of the things that they can often commonly miss? I'm not down to single moms or motherhood or anything, but is the style of parenting that is adventurous, does that come easier to fathers or more naturally? Is that something that can commonly be missing from the upbringing equation if the dad's not in the picture?
I would say maybe there might be some degree of generalization or stereotype that fits that. It's probably more often the father who's taking the kids out to shoot or fish or canoe or those kind of things.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's too generalized.
Yeah, it sounds stereotypical.
But particularly in my generation, that was more the case. We're probably more rounded now, but in my generation, that was definitely more the case.
Yeah.
So our father would take us, before he passed, he would take my sister and I out on outings on Sundays after church, and it'd just be him and us, and we'd get into little adventures. But yeah, at that teenage years, like there was very little going to ball games, getting involved in ball teams. There was very little outdoor type activities. I mean, there was lots of playing in the neighborhood, but as far as officially going out and trying things, it wasn't there. But
Yeah.
for me, the adventure spilled over into the second part of the parenting, which was that practical view. Um, I wanted, one of the things, I don't know where I got the lesson. I wish I could remember, but early on, one of the things I learned about entrepreneurs, business leaders, was one thing they had in common that most people can't put a value on and can't be equated, but is really, really important to keep in the equation. Especially whenever you're talking about the person out there in business, sometimes they get harassed for being too successful, whatever.
Totally.
The thing that entrepreneurs have is a willingness to take a risk.
Yeah.
You'll see a guy who will put his house up as collateral because he believes he can make this business work. I mean, that's risk.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who'd rather work 9 to 5, get a check, and never take that risk. So the entrepreneur takes a risk. And I don't know where I read about that, studied that, saw that, but that there was some, and probably, the reverse, early on, there was a period, especially as you're losing your father, you're more susceptible to fear. And I didn't want to be that person as I grew up. So, you're fighting that and going the other way. And so part of my gig on the non-minister side is, like I said, you name it, we'll try it. And so when I would look for jobs, I would never think there was a limitation unless there was a degree requirement that was outside my field. If it said you had to have a PhD or a master's in, biophysics, I knew I was out. But otherwise, I thought to myself, I'm going for it. I'm going to give it a try. And so, I have this crazy list of stuff I've done. It's really pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I would feed that over to the kids as they grew. It's like, you can do whatever you want. There's no limitation on you. My son, we got him a ride mower. His grandfather actually gave him a ride mower when he was 12. By the time he was 15, he was paying a college kid $10 an hour to drive him around in his own work van, pulling a trailer, 16-foot trailer with 0-turn mowers and weed eaters, and they had 35 clients.
Oh, wow.
So we had them out early in that regard, but it was also, don't be afraid. I mean, we took a trip one summer, and one of the boys he left behind mowing while we were on the trip just tore it up over in Andover, scalped like half the front yard.
Wow.
So, what I said to my son is, you have to go talk to that customer. This is your business. You have to go talk to him. Now, I got your back. I'm going to help you cover this risk. So we're going to make this right. If we have to buy this guy sod, if we have to reseed his, whatever we do, have to do to fix this, we'll fix it. I'm here for you.
Yeah.
But this is your thing. And so, he had to face that. I minimized some of his risk by being his backup, but it was trying to teach him early on some sense of be willing to take some of those risks. That's part of that adventure of life.
Yeah. Huge. That's huge. I think the scariest part is not the risk of messing up like physical property or whatever, but the scary part is, like he encountered with your support there, looking somebody in the eye after you've messed up and they're the client, and having that difficult in-person conversation to just say, I'm sorry, how can I make this right?
That's really hard. That really is the hard part.
Yeah, it's super hard. I love the magic and the growth that happens when I work with young people, and excuse me, we find out a career that they might be interested in doing, a job that they might be interested in doing, and I'll find somebody in my network or cold call if I have to, and find somebody who's doing that for a living, what they want to do one day. And we do a little phone interview, and we get them on the phone, and sometimes they have to start with just sort of abiding and listening to the side while I conduct the first interview. Then they build up confidence, and once they knock out that first phone call, which is kind of a lost skill, unfortunately, man, they are just grinning like they could eat a banana sideways, and they really get fired up there. And then the interest kind of takes off on its own. They gain so much confidence and boldness from that, just gets fired
Yeah.
up.
Well, and I mean, you think really those type of moments are the growth moments. I mean, his dealing with that customer probably helped him grow more than countless hours of not having complications. I was years ago, I was in the country club business, and we had some very influential members in the city I was in. And one of them one night had everything that he had planned had not met his expectation. And I was not in on the planning. I didn't know that, but I was the one who faced the brunt of his disappointment. And, he was used to the typical response he was used to was the "it's not my fault" response. And I mean, really, not this, there was no stroke of wisdom here. It was just one of those I got lucky moments. Instead of saying this wasn't my fault, or I didn't know, or no one told me, my answer was just, I realize this upsets you. I know this is wrong. You tell me what I can do to make it right, and I will do it. Let's skip the blame game. Let's go straight to the fix it. And what I learned from that is from that moment forward, my relationship with that member was phenomenal. Every time he came in, he treated me wonderfully, amazing respect, to the point that every now and then someone would say, "Hey, there's so-and-so, why don't you go take care of him?"
Yeah, you're the whisperer for this guy.
Yeah. And just, I mean, I wish I could say I had this brilliant, insight to handle that. It just turned out that way as luck, but that lesson stuck with me. And even now, I still sometimes revert to the opposite, but that lesson stuck with me, the power of, forget the excuse. The person wants a solution. They don't want the excuse. And so before my son went to that person, that's what I said, he doesn't really want the excuse. He wants to know what's going to come next.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of those ways of preparing them for the world side, that I guess you'd say the secular side of parenting.
Yeah, and that's something I've seen, mothers and fathers do successfully, is sort of, hold the young person responsible for, going back over and covering your tracks and making things right, and addressing the breakdown or the mistake that was made or whatever. Now, for me, one thing that makes those conversations more likely to go south is, like, in my mind, I know how to do it and how to make it right. But in the moment, when somebody's in front of me and their face is getting red and their nostrils are flaring and stuff, it triggers my emotional, and then I look like I'm getting red and my face is flaring, and it just like turns into this feedback loop. And one thing I noticed that you didn't skip over was honoring that person's emotion. Like, hey, look, I can see that this has frustrated you. I think that was a big ingredient in the success of that conversation you had with the country club guy. Was you honored and named his emotion to the best of your ability, and then went and skipped the blame step and went to how can we fix it. Those are tough for me. Like, have your emotions, like, how did you get to the point where you were able to sort of like control your emotional responses and your look on your face and everything? How did you get that mastered? That's been difficult for me.
Well, again, I'd love to say I always get it, but that isn't the case. The laughing joke around the house here is, look out, Dad's going to the cell phone store,
Like, you're going to go.
Never goes well. Never goes well. But in some of my reading and studies, particularly on the pastor side of dealing with marriages and all this marriage counseling, and some of that applied also in the business world. And so typically what happens is, like you just said, as that emotion builds in one, the other responds, and it just gets more and more heated. And so here we read in like counseling sessions, some turn it into like an egg toss. If you both try to catch that egg up high, it just cracks in your hand, but you want to take a little of the energy out of it as it's coming at you. Ooh. And so, I saw that worked in conflict resolution with couples, kids and parents. And so I have to, and again, I have to make myself remember to take some of that energy out. I'm like every other human. My initial response is, I can feel the heat build up inside me. I want to respond, but I saw a podcast with Mark Cuban the other day, and even he said, one of the keys to success is be kind. It works. And so I have to kind of remind myself, you charge, they charge. I mean, it's just like two rams hitting head on. What's the solution here? But take some of that energy out, catch and take some of that energy out, and it changes things. And again, I would be hypocritical to say I always did that, but I try to remember that illustration. Sometimes I try to visually picture, catching an egg. Oh, okay. I gotta take some of this, I gotta scoop some of this out.
That's powerful.
And it changes the nature. And when you do that though, when you can relieve that from the other person, it's phenomenal, the impact that it makes.
Yeah, that's phenomenal, man. I've heard a business coach say before that, it's all in conversations. It's all about managing the energy, and if somebody's starting to lean away, there's no sense in you continuing to lean in. You may as well just go ahead and lean away too, because you're not going to get anything by chasing them down. And you've tapped on to something important in that energy management theme too there. Instead of both of you continuing to just lean into each other where you're cracking horns, that egg toss visual, I'm going to use that. I appreciate that. That's a good insight.
It's helped me a lot. Again, sometimes I start to get heated and then remind myself, oh, this isn't going to work.
Mm-hmm. From a spiritual and faith-based point of view, do you think, what's the difference in like mentoring styles? Let's say there's somebody listening who wants to get involved with, mentoring some young people in his local area, in his neighborhood or something. If he has faith already, should he lead with faith-based conversations? Should he hold off on that and play that card later? Or, if he's not a person of faith, is it going to be different for him mentoring young people versus like a faith-based person? What's your take on that?
Well, of course, from my perspective, if he's not a person of faith, yes, because the foundation is an eternal foundation. So if we're not concerned about the eternal foundation, the other is just a temporary solution. And so, the faith is paramount. And that's why I said, unfortunately, we can find, 1,000 people who'd rather mentor a kid into being a good athlete than into being a good Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean that to sound as negative as it might sound, but it's so easy for us to focus on the temporary, the now, what we see. And I understand that rather than what we don't see. Even in sales, I would say it's usually easier for a person to sell tangibles than it is intangibles. The person who can sell intangibles really can sell. You hear about that guy that can sell a refrigerator to an Eskimo. That's a guy that can sell an intangible. He can get you to grasp an idea without you having a product in front of him.
Yeah.
So the same is kind of life. There's a lot of tangible mentorship that's, it's right there. You can see it. If I know how to make a good baseball swing, I can show you how to make a good baseball swing. Whereas the faith life has more intangible to it. It's much more hard to explain this God who you don't see, who's communicating to you, normally not in an audible voice, and directing you, and how this word applies, and how that, and so I understand that it's more difficult, but it's definitely, foundational, because that's the eternal. And that really, if we were created to be driven by the Spirit, I think when the Bible says work it out, it's definitely not a verse about doing works. It's about something that's put inside you that begins to permeate all the way out. And so that's why I would think that's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
So I would see it kind of as the tangible, intangible, if we were doing sales training.
Yeah. Offer me some critique on this process, if you would. Like for me, my style, I guess, or the way that I've had the most success with developing youth is, I'm leading my life in a way where you can look at it from any side, and I'm transparent. I'm an open book, and my life is my witness. As we talk about, like having a good witness, we talk about that in the church community. It just basically means um, you're not doing anything that would dishonor your faith or your God, and like by following your example, people will typically be living a good upright life as well. Our witness. So having a good witness, and then investing in building confidence, helping young people feel successful, get a taste of success, and through some skills training and some healthy risk taking. So starts to, I guess, like build them up and add value to where they're like a little bit better skilled and more confident than they were before. And then from there, I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, now that we have a relationship and you kind of like me and trust me because I've been someone who's positive in your life, now I'm kind of in a position where, one day I can offer a little take it or leave it. Would you like to, do a Bible study at some point, or do you ever go to church, or whatever sort of least invasive way to kind of, name what the faith factor is. Is that cowardly to do it that way? Should someone?
No. I think that's wise because it builds relationship, and I think also transparency is powerful. Uh, Showing someone your spiritual life doesn't mean just showing them perfection. What it means is showing them you have this identity, which is in Christ, which says even my brokenness is taken by Him, and so I have flaws and I have made mistakes. Even going to your 10-year-old son saying, I don't know if I did this right. I'm apologizing. I believe I did the right thing, but I'm still trying.
Yeah.
And so, for me, one of the things, especially on that, just a little side note, we had read some books on parenting as we were getting ready to have kids because we had made that shift from know-it-all to, oh my gosh, we're bringing one home. What are we going to do? And one of the principles that applied to me from the book and what I'd seen in youth ministry is if we're going to say it, let's be real. Let's honor it. So I'd seen a lot of parents say, if you do that again, and then they'd name a consequence, but never do the consequence.
Oh.
So I kind of made that principle. If I tell you I'm going to take away your Game Boy, for example, and send it to the missions field, if I tell you that as a consequence of what you're doing and you don't change what you're doing, I will do it. I'm going to honor what I said.
Yeah.
And so it also caused me to think through, I'm not just going to be flippant in what I say, because I'm going to hold myself accountable to backing that up. So, maybe sometimes I set those parameters and then went back and was like, look, that may have been too harsh, but I got to stand by what I say.
Yeah.
And so, I think transparency, being willing to admit who you are and let them see that, really helps build that relationship to where you can be more genuine and say, hey, how about we look into where this faith of mine comes from? So I think that's a nice pathway.
All right. Awesome. And what you were saying about 86 in the Game Boy, have you ever seen that video floating around on the interwebs of the guy on his riding mower, and he's, I guess, disciplining his kid? They did something majorly bad, and he was fed up, and he just like took the entire box of all their little video games and stuff and just dumped it on the lawn, and then just shredded the whole match with his riding mower, and like chunks of plastic are flying everywhere, and the kid's just losing his ever-loving mind. Just complete meltdown.
I didn't see it, but I mean, that's that thing, if you say you're going to do it, then you're like, oh my gosh, I got to do this.
I'm locked in, bro. Yeah, it's like, man, challenge.
Of course, the irony of my world is we probably would have got another Game Boy for Christmas. I mean, but
yeah.
my kids, and they laugh about it sometimes. I mean, when we have dinners now, they'll make fun of some of the, stuff from their childhood. But because of my ministry side, and I'd been on missions trips.
Yeah.
And so, every now and then, let's just say when my son was little, we might be at Target and they got a new Batman figurine out. He wants the new one. He just got one a couple of weeks ago. You're like, I would look at him and say, really? There's going to be 1,000 kids die in Africa tonight because they don't have food, and you're going to give me that look over a Batman? You think that's going to work on me? So they will laugh to this day about, that.
The kids dying in Africa, Mr.
Yeah.
Dad moment, yeah.
That point.